Everybody, thanks for taking the time to tune in to Sunday School Bonanza, a This Week in Mormons production. Nice of you to be here with us. We hope that you find utility in what we're about to do, which is go over a gospel doctrine lesson and get you prepared for everything. We're on the penultimate lesson of the Old Testament. We're winding down, folks. Hope you're having a good holiday season. Lesson 47, Let Us Rise Up and Build. Many books covered here, but primarily Ezra and Nehemiah, and to a lesser extent, Haggai is just sort of referenced if you want him.
Haggai, a guy.
Haggai. And that voice you hear, Bill Doolittle, coming to us from the Sooner State.
Hey, folks.
Bill, how's life in Oklahoma now?
Well, it's windy here. It's, there's people forget it comes sweeping down the plain. A lot of people think it comes rushing or...
You talked about that last time.
Did I?
I remember that.
It's a problem.
It comes sweeping down
the plane. Don't forget.
Have you hung out with the pioneer woman?
In
Ree Drummond. Have you hung out with Ree Drummond?
No, we haven't hung out yet.
Do you know who that is?
I have no idea what you're talking about.
I bet our female listeners know what I'm talking about. But Bill, I will leave it to you to find the pioneer woman.
I've been looking for her my whole life, man.
It's your charge. So Google it. I promise you'll be okay.
I'll do what I can.
All right. So lesson 47 again. We're gonna get into some great stuff here. Historically, I think this is a good time to set a lot of to bring back some context of the time period we're in. At this point, Babylon has waned, of course, as we know, and now Persia is the place to be. Persia is what's going on,
and we knew that was going to happen because they told us when all the Isaiah and everybody prophesied about Babylon's going to come in and wipe us out. But don't worry, they're a razor that is hired, and they're going to get whooped. So don't get too high.
And
they
did get
Babylon.
Whooped. And the great thing about them getting whooped is that Persia under Cyrus was a bit more of a flexible leadership. They were not, because Babylon was very much like, nope, we're leading from the top down.
Yeah.
We want everyone to be Babylonian. We don't have a lot of room for dissent, even though we had examples of Daniel and others who did have affect positive change. But Persia under Cyrus, on the other hand, was very much like, I want the people to worship as they have worshipped. I want to have more of a pluralistic society. As long as we're all happy being under my rule as a state, then the people can do whatever they want.
Yeah.
I'm simplifying, but I think that...
Well, it's a lot cheaper. You don't have to send your army everywhere to, fight down people's cultures, right?
Fair point, Bill. So then what happens here, of course? King Cyrus, being a nice guy, just up and decides to tell the Jews, like, you can go back to Jerusalem. I'm cool with it.
Yep.
I mean, is it that straightforward? Well, it's not quite that straightforward. What happens is, as we see in Ezra chapter 1, actually, in the very beginning, Cyrus sort of is visited, he says. I'll read it. In chapter 1, verses 1 through 2, he says, Now in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom, and put it also in writing, saying, Thus saith Cyrus, king of Persia, the Lord God of heaven hath given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he hath charged me to build him an house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. So it's kind of cool. His heart was very much softened.
Yeah, and there's an interesting note in the lesson material about him reading. This is a note from. It talks about Josephus, the historian, the Jewish historian, right? Mm-hmm. He reported that Cyrus read his own name in Isaiah's prophecies, and that was what kind of touched his heart, and he realized, these prophecies are true because I am me, right? Yeah.
It's still amazing he didn't just discount it and just say blah blah. You expect rulers to be like blah 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 blah. I always think of like King Noah in the Book of Mormon in situations like this. Just like whatever, don't care.
Yeah, but he's that's a pretty cool way to you read your own name in the scriptures and you're like, oh, maybe these people have something.
Yeah, so it's great, and of course the story of Cyrus does come before. It says before the book of Isaiah in the Old Testament, right? Interesting. Doesn't quite make sense to me. That's what it says.
I'm trying to figure that out.
The story of Cyrus comes before the book of Isaiah in the Old Testament. Isaiah lived about 150 years before Cyrus was born. Okay.
So wait. The story comes 150 years before. Yeah, that's right.
The story of Cyrus comes before the book of Isaiah.
Comes before the book of Isaiah?
Maybe chronologically. I don't even think it's that. We're all mixed up here, folks. Help us. Help us not be confused. It's the end of the year. I've had a lot of eggnog. I'm just messed up. Sorry. But I like. So
I'm over here Googling Pioneer Woman, so I'm distracted.
So the first wave goes over. Zerubbabel and Jeshua lead the first group of the Jews back to Jerusalem, okay? And who do they find there? They find the Samaritans. And as a recap, Samaritans were sort of like lay Jews who just intermarried and intermingled and didn't care as much about the whole purity of Jewness kind of thing.
Yeah, they basically, after the Jews were wiped out and carried off to Babylon, they were the sort of people left, and then they just intermarried with the culture that was around because they didn't have a people, right? They didn't have a place to be.
And so that's what they did. So the funny thing, though, is the Jews knew they were going to go back, rebuild the temple. Great. This is a huge thing for them because it was destroyed before. The Samaritans wanted to be a part of the festivities. Mm-hmm. But the Jews then told them, nope. The Lord has commanded us, the true believers, the ones who have stayed a part of the faith, to do this. You have tainted, I don't know, the faith, whatever. Either way, you're not worthy in a sense, I guess you could say. So they had a bit of a row with that, with the Samaritans wanting to. They even went as far, the Samaritans even complained to later kings who succeeded Cyrus. I mean, they said, hey, they're not letting us build the temple. We're Jewish too.
Yeah. We're Jewish-ish.
Jewish-ish. That could be like that show Blackish, but it's Jewish-ish. I like it. Would you ever think about that? Just saying Jewish is kind of funny when you think about it. What are you, Jewish?
Yeah. And,
okay, that's a side note. But it's interesting here the Jews were not very accommodating. And I understand a lot of the Old Testament is through that sort of decree. I mean, the Old Testament is replete with examples of the Jews failing to drive out outside influences from their borders,
right,
and thus getting into hot water eventually. Now, I don't know, Bill, do you think they've learned their lesson, and that's why at this point they're being kind of standoffish with the Samaritans, thinking let's not screw it up this time, guys?
I think that's right. I mean, this is, this sort of is an unsettling verse for us to read because we live in the era after Peter's revelation on the Gentiles, right?
Sure.
So now the gospel is for everybody. But at this time, the gospel was almost part and parcel with Jewish nationalism. Yeah. It was the tribe of Israel, the people of Israel, most of them having been taken away. It's the Jews are left, and they say, this is our thing, and we're not going to let it get way down. I mean, Solomon famously, wipes out the groves because although there was some good worship at the groves, it was also really easy for the local religions to influence everything. So he just said, nope, you worship at the temple, and that's it. And these are people coming back who are emotionally, longing to reestablish their identity as a people, and they are not going to let anybody cloud it with other stuff that's going on in the region. Even people who used to be part of their tribe or people who are descendants of their tribe, we're going to be pure about this one.
I think it's really interesting to me, and I get the reasons why. But then as I've read through the Old Testament, it's funny because we talk about gospel to the Gentiles, and yet in the Old Testament we had examples sort of like that. I mean, you have Naaman, who was an Assyrian. You have Jonah going to Nineveh, which was the opulent city of the Assyrians, to preach.
Right.
So it's not like it was unheard of for Jews to actually go beyond the tribe and still convert others. I mean, I think you even found during the Babylonian captivity and sometimes with Persia, you found that leaders and others were influenced. I mean, with Daniel and his friends, I mean, it eventually became that who was it by that point? I think it was Darius, right? Basically said hey, these guys didn't die in the lion's den or the furnace. This is sort of the law.
Nebuchadnezzar.
I think that was well after. Well, Nebuchadnezzar was the furnace, but then it was later on with this thing. But either way, so it's interesting to me but I understand why they would be trying to maintain the purity of the faith here.
Yeah, and it's one thing to have, them preaching their faith to others, right, and saying, here's our faith that you should maybe adopt. It's another thing to say, we're going to allow our faith to be modified by you, right?
Exactly.
I mean, it's,
But there's always a risk. I mean, But I love seeing the parallels of that today. I mean, I think where the church can, they prefer to contract with LDS-owned firms to build our temples today. That's what I've seen. And then even, of course, we are realistic now and don't assume we're going to have construction crews full of Mormons with temple recommends to build the new temples. But we do have rules at our temple sites.
Yeah.
LDS or not, no drinking, no smoking, watch your language, stuff like that they agree to. And I think that's sort of an interesting analog for how we go about our own temple construction today. I mean, we're practical about it, but at the same time, we still believe that even if it's not dedicated, just building it is also a sacred experience.
Yeah.
And while we have to accommodate the realities of the global economy and of our neighborhoods and stuff like that, we still do our best to ensure that the right atmosphere is provided for the construction of those temples.
I even heard a story from a friend of mine whose dad worked in temple construction, that there was a temple building site and they had built the foundation wall. And one of the workers who, at any normal construction site, he needed to, nature called him. And so he went around the corner and just, relieved himself against the wall of it. And the overseer from the church made them tear down the entire wall and rebuild it, because that's how sacred the building experience needed to be.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
So that's happening. So they're building it, and then time goes on. You get the second wave. Actually, as this one, Ezra himself actually comes in. Ezra takes another group to Jerusalem. Stuff's going okay. I don't have a lot more to say about that, but stuff's going okay. He protects the people, and they're settling well, and they're not having much difficulty reclaiming their former promised land.
That's right.
This is a big deal, though, because it's really setting the stage for the New Testament at this point. If it had not been for the Spirit touching Cyrus in the way it did, it could have been an extremely different situation. I mean, it's very easy to take for granted the meridian of time and just think of the Jews hanging out in the Levant doing their thing like they had been under Roman rule. But this was a miracle to actually return to the land after they've been gone for what did we decide the captivity was? Not crazy long, but 150 years or so. Yeah. That's a big deal.
That's a lot of time.
Yeah.
And it's really amazing that they get back in, and then from this time now for several hundred years afterwards until Christ comes, we don't see another break in there being a Jewish people and them having an identity. Like there are some who's the boss in the area, that changes several times between the period that we're talking about.
But they're
and
allowed to retain Jewish identity.
But they're still there, and they rebuild the walls of the temple here. Herod will later pick up and rebuild the temple in a major fashion, right, prior to the Savior, and then you get, that's the temple that's there. Yeah. So it's really interesting because without this rebuilding, we think of Christ coming, and a lot of his message is a response to Judaism as an established culture. And like you were saying, that wouldn't be there. Christ's message, who knows? It would have been different. But
what I wonder, and we'll get into some parts of this. What I wonder is, while they were striving to maintain the purity of things and keep it orthodox, I guess, how much do you think the schisms between Sadducees, Pharisees was affected by the exile, by the loss of records? Things were restored through prophets, like you see later on here at the end. Ezra reads scripture to the people. And this is a bigger deal than it seems, because after they'd rebuilt city walls and built all this stuff, most people have been in captivity for so long, they didn't have their scriptures or their record. And so to actually have their leader read to them again was this great restoration. I can't help but wonder if part of the schism, and this is showing my ignorance to Jewish history, but if part of that did develop as a side effect of the captivity, that things got lost over time, even if they brought it back, people...
I mean, certainly, I don't know the answer to that question, but I think it's certainly possible, and most schisms are based on what each side considers to be an ambiguity in the authorities that tell them what they have to do or what the doctrine is. And so it's a big moment when he rereads the scriptures, because now they have this full record, and it's a wonderful thing, because if you think about what records they had at that time, they are all. Or not all, but many of them are of a strong Israel, a strong Judah. You have the Pentateuch telling the story of the establishment of the Jewish people coming out of, the creation of the world and everything, and then them coming out of Israel or out of Egypt and becoming a people. Their leadership, with their own kings and everything. Like, this is the kind of story you want to hear if you're reestablishing. Like, oh, we have a history.
Exactly,
and that's amazing to them, right? They begin to weep. And they have to kind of talk the people out of like weeping and grieving. They're like, this is a great cause to rejoice, and more for the nationalist point than almost anything else.
It'll be like when Catalonia is eventually free of Spain. Just the same level of joy, minus religious differences. Yeah. One part in this lesson I love is when it sort of asks the question of like, what can we do to be... What's the actual question? What can we do with our leaders?
What can we do to get... Let me find it, because it's really interesting. Here it is. What can we do to encourage government leaders' hearts to be softened toward the church? And then it says answers could include obeying the laws of the land, doing good, teaching people about the gospel, and praying for the Lord to soften their hearts. Which is kind of, I mean, that's interesting. That like,
well, I think it's legit. When it's like anything else, you have a good relationship with any kind of a body. It's going to be better than not having one. But I feel like now as Latter-day Saints, I think this whole religious freedom push, I think we're kind of running up against stuff now in a different way. These manuals are years old at this point, so a lot's changed since then. But I think that's true, but I can't help but see it's like, do these things, obey the laws of the land. Also actively campaign to change the laws of the land or protect the laws as you see fit.
Yeah.
Based on the causes we have as Latter-day Saints.
Well, and that's probably why there's sort of a divinity given to a democracy in Mormonism, right? I mean, there's
right,
or at least that kind of freedom, not necessarily our form of government specifically, but you read all throughout the Book of Mormon of appreciating this kind of freedom, and that's because, well, if we get to be the leaders, then it's a lot easier to support the leaders and to have them be friendly with us.
If we get to be the leaders,
we get to pick who they are, at least.
It's like
right?
the difference between the construction of the Gilbert Temple and the Phoenix Temple. The Gilbert Temple was rubber stamped because of all the Mormons there, and the Phoenix Temple had all this opposition. So guys, get elected.
That's right. Or make friends. Or I guess the real lesson from this is let's as a church write revelations with the names of leaders in them and speak favorably of them.
You haven't read section.
That's how we should.
You haven't read section 134.
Which leader is that one?
It says Obama.
Oh, it does. Yeah,
it's right there.
Well,
to him. It says, let my people go.
I know a lot of people who feel that way.
We are culture warriors now, Bill. That's how it is.
Culture warriors who really want everybody to like us while we're warring against them. Like, hey, we're, this is how we view about it. And we know you probably strongly disagree with us, but we really like you. And by the way, like, we sing and dance, and we
make documentaries.
Yeah, we make
you can go see
about ourselves.
Get the fuzz. hard hitting documentaries
about Mormons are nice.
Well, we are nice. So, whatever. I guess the point does stand. It's better to work with people than than work through.
Because look at the restoration that comes when they work with Cyrus. Cyrus has an open heart, so he deserves a lot of credit, of course, for what happened. But these were people who were willing to, while maintaining the purity of their faith, try to work with the leader to be able to express that faith when they found a leader that was compatible with it. So that's that's
and it worked out. It set a very important precedent for things that were to come. And honorable mention here as we go. Nehemiah helps them build the walls to protect Jerusalem once more. And this is another part of the lesson. I think I'm just going to glance over it right now, unless you have a lot to say about it, Bill.
No, I don't.
But it's very cool. That was sort of the last real step, kind of in solidifying Jerusalem's return. So it was a big deal as well. That's in Nehemiah, all of Nehemiah, the whole thing.
The whole thing. That's what it's about.
Okay, cool. Anything else you want to mention, Bill, before we go?
No, I think that's it. I think this is just a great reestablishment of the Jewish people.
Okay.
And now that we've got them reestablished, I think we can move on.
All right, folks. Well, hope you're having a great holiday season. Thank you for taking the time to tune in and listen to this. Please leave us a review on iTunes. That's something that can help out quite a bit. We'd greatly appreciate it. It actually helps with our searchability and our rankings and stuff like that. So if you do that, it's good for the show. It helps other people become more aware of us. Also, you can share the show with your friends. That's a great thing to do as well. Please join us at thisweekinmormons.com. Send us an email, contact at thisweekinmormons.com. And you can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Pinterest, Google+, YouTube. All good things, up and down and around. It's circular. Goes up and Happy Gilmore? No?
Kind of.
All right. Bill.
I know that one better than Pioneer.
Happy New Year, Bill.
Happy New Year, Jeff.
We'll talk to you soon, I hope. New Testament's coming up, folks. One more lesson, and it's New Testament time. Thanks for listening to Sunday School Bonanza. Hope